am Glaucia Rosas, co-founder and director at the EduTech Alliance. In this series of interviews, I am talking with key figures on the international edutech scene to get their perspectives on how schools can really get themselves on track with their education technology. Hi everyone, I have the pleasure of having here with me Hannah Young. She is an experienced history, politics, and modern studies teacher and an amazing instructional designer. She's an expert on creating innovative blended learning experiences that focus on the development of 21st century skills. And she's the founder of Hexis21, a company that trains teachers on design thinking and digital learning, and also consults for schools on project-based curriculum design. But to warm up this interview, I will first share her a video on her philosophy, education philosophy. So check it out.
We do not know what the future will hold. We do not know the implications of the dominance of artificial intelligence on the world of work. But we can anticipate that most jobs will change. Organisations and people will have to adapt to survive. How can we prepare our young people for the future world of work when we don't know what that world might look like? What can we do to help them now? What we can do is accept that education systems need to adapt to prepare our young people for their futures. Rote learning factual information and memorising model answers will not prepare young people to survive and thrive in the future. Education that is driven by standardised tests allow entry to the next level of education, but such achievements soon run out of steam and value to the young person. Education needs to be built upon the foundations of curiosity, creative problem-solving, critical thinking, collaboration and communication. Educational reform is a slow-moving beast, but educators in schools can enact change now. They can be the change that their students need. Building into lessons opportunities to meet the essential core competencies of creativity, critical thinking, collaboration and communication is just the beginning of the educational reform journey. And curiosity is at the core of this change. We must create space in our curricula for students to ask why over and over again, rather than ask whether the lesson contents is in the exam. Such an approach will open up greater opportunities, choices and freedoms for students because they will have the capacity to be agile in their thinking. Universities, parents and employers are all key players along this journey. This is a culture shift which is long overdue, but essential if young people are going to be able to thrive and survive in the future.
Hi, Hannah. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you.
So, well, it was great to see your education philosophy. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. So, actually, my first question is about that philosophy. So, on a previous interview with Dr. Arnie Bieber, he mentioned that the education, and I'm quoting him, so the education playbook has changed completely over the past year. So, do you think schools have moved towards the direction of on the opposite direction of your education philosophy?
Well, that's a great first question. I think that it's a huge question as well. And I think that all schools are trying their very best, but they're all operating within their own constraints, context and values as well. And I think this makes a collegiate approach to education design really difficult. So any kind of movement towards the 4 C's, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration and communication is going to be piecemeal. But what's been encouraging is that there are a huge number of conversations now being had surrounding a need to evolve education design. But for some schools, returning to normal is perhaps higher up on their agenda. And I think that is because of the double disruption of the pandemic and the economic downturn makes change scary, but unfeasible for many schools and parents. And yet these disruptions have accelerated the real need for change because they've shone a light on what is really an industrial era system that's not really preparing students adequately for their future. So I think while many schools want to make a shift, I think they probably feel their hands are tied because what they aim to provide in the first instance is a sense of security and familiarity as children return to the classroom and parents return to work. but I am an advocate of the work being done in Project Zero at Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I'm currently studying, and particularly the work of Ron Richhart. And he actually writes, he says, the root of the problem is that we're teaching the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's quite disruptive to say that, and yet that's exactly what we need. Ron Richard writes about how schools need to be developing visible cultures of thinking and teaching intellectual character, and these are essential principles when designing schools. When you think about metacognition, self-regulation, self-reflection, curiosity, all of these essential skills now and in the future are things that schools need to focus on, but I think that will be gradual for many schools. And I think in the first instance, schools need to think really deeply about how learning happens and doesn't happen, what effective teaching can deliver, and whether students' education experiences are rooted in real world issues, and whether they're purpose driven, and what is the school's purpose? What's their why?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and I guess you kind of answered my second question, but I think we can elaborate a little bit more on that. And as you were just saying, the project-based learning, we know it's, as educators, we know it's better than content-based learning. It makes much more sense. And we should focus, obviously, on developing skills and not learning the content that we will forget anyways. But schools in general are still content-based, and because they are still exam-based. So how can schools overcome the dilemma of being more project-based when they have to do exams that we know how they work?
Yeah, this is the problem, isn't it? Because project-based learning, or PBL, seems like an impossible task to switch 100% to. And that, again, sounds quite frightening for many schools. And also because, as you say, schools are exam driven, PBL doesn't fit that model at the moment. And there's an unpredictability about PBL because we don't necessarily know what it looks like. And that can be unnerving in an education setting. And even switching away from content-rich direct instruction and moving more towards the 4 C's, creativity, etc., can be quite a significant culture shift. But it comes down to what schools believe effective learning and teaching looks like. So does it look like a teacher at the front of the room commanding a group of silent children who are passively listening? Or does it look like a fancy PowerPoint with children's exercise books filled with notes copied from the presentation? Or does it look like children working together, solving problems with a facilitating teacher? I expect that in many schools, all of these things exist in some respect. And schools really are quite conservative environments, and they've needed to be, given parental expectations, university entrance requirements, government guidelines. So I believe for many schools, abandoning something that they know and arguably works in some parameters is not really desirable or feasible. So a way to move it forward, I think, is to develop a model of what you might call equity leadership, where teachers are encouraged to collaborate with each other rather than being directed from the top. And you're going to get much better buy-in, I think, when teachers are able to design the system that's driven by the needs of the learners now and in the future. So this includes the content, but also competency development. So this is a massive culture shift. So it doesn't have to be, all exams or PBL. It can be exams and then a focus on the 4 C's, and then have PBL as, I don't want to say add-on, because I don't think PBL is an add-on, but I think for some schools, a transition could be made easier if it was something that was introduced perhaps in a summer term where there's less pressure on teaching staff and workload, to then get ease people into it, because it's the fear, isn't it, of what does that look like? How's that going to impact on me? Will students get anything out of it? Will it increase my workload?
And how am I going to deliver the grades I have to at the end if I can't manage to do that with the PBL? Yeah.
Exactly. So that's a common issue, isn't it, with moving, out of that comfort zone of standardized testing, is how do you assess that? How do you assess competency? How do you assign a number to that, or a grade? And should you even be doing that? So, I don't have the answers there, but I think when we're looking at competency reporting, we need to be using words, not numbers or grades, is where I'm at with that. But I think when, you think about the 4 Cs, and you've got the UN, the World Economic Forum, the British Council, and lots of different organizations state that 4 Cs are essential.
Yeah.
And you need the content first, but then you need to then have teaching strategies that then develop those practice and develop those skills. And in order for teachers to feel like they can do that, schools need to provide and create a sense of psychological safety so that teachers feel comfortable being uncomfortable. And part of that process is unlearning. And unlearning is where we all need to be in our lives at some point, where we think, is that working anymore? And if it's not, let's take it away and let's relearn and then move forward. I think teaching is a craft. It's an ongoing process. And so, we need to create cultures in schools for thinking, welcoming, embracing change, however gradual that is, not only for students, but for teachers too. And that can look like PBL, it can look like a more skills focused approach. It can look like many different things in many different schools, in many different classrooms. And we're not looking for one size fits all, but we are looking for dialogue. That's what we're looking for, I think.
No, definitely. And I think many schools that were already in this journey to PBL, I mean, the fact that, they had to do online learning was an extra challenge because they were still building that confidence in PBL, and now how to do this on online learning, how to assess it, and so on. And that was my next question. You are an expert in blended and hybrid learning. So when it comes to shifting from face-to-face to blended or hybrid, in your opinion, is it a question of adaptation or complete redesign? What do you reckon?
I mean, that's a great question. I think when we shift from face-to-face to online overnight, teachers had to pivot, and everything they did was well-intentioned. Okay, this is not a criticism of anyone here, but I do think that some traditional teaching methodologies that work in classrooms don't translate well online, and research shows that. So there is a need for adaptation, and this requires teachers to have time to develop their knowledge and their skills, and so they feel more confident, because I think a lot of teaching staff lack confidence because it's frightening looking at yourself for 5 hours a day on the screen. And I found it difficult, and I do it all the time, but I find that I can speak quite freely in a classroom, but the minute the camera comes on, I start to doubt myself. But I think, and studies have shown that when teachers record themselves for an hour speaking, okay, which you tend to find more in higher education, but still you find this in high schools as well, or when a teacher speaks over a PowerPoint for the same length of time, students become disengaged because they're not actually doing anything. So for me, what can work better is when you have if you have a lecture style teacher. So if they break that content down to micro content, 3 to 5 minute video, and then the next step is an active learning task, a breakout room, online office hours, live chat support, those have proven to be far more effective when it comes to student engagement, but also enjoyment, because we can't take away from, we don't just want kids to just be looking at the screen all the time. And so we can say, well, we've ticked that engagement box, or they've done the work, therefore they're participating. Are they enjoying it? That we've got to ask ourselves that too. Imagine a child who's a high school student and they have 5 hours of online lecture-based content every day for months. And that was a reality for some students.
Yeah.
Even the most diligent students are going to find that overwhelming. Now, what we also need to think about is that also doesn't work in face-to-face environments. Some children will be in schools where they have 5 hours of listening to a teacher and they don't do anything at all. Now, in order to achieve learning mastery, children need to do something. Adults need to do something with the knowledge they've been given. So they need to process it. And you can only do that with active learning tasks. And that's where the 4 Cs come in. Now, I think, when we move back towards, almost like 100% full attendance, perhaps, then blended learning is the way to transition, because we don't want to say, right, well, we're now back, so let's just forget that online learning nightmare and pretend that didn't happen, because it did. And there were some really good things that we should take forward from that, and that one of them is blended learning.
Definitely, yes. I mean, we that work with education technology, I think we've been trying to push it for a long time to schools. The needs, not because it's cool, but it's because it's important to have it. It's also a strategy, you know, not only when you have a pandemic situation, but sometimes you have students who are, you know, they might be in the hospital and they still need to learn, or they might be, you know, competing something for, you know, sports, you know, and they can't be in school all the time. So it's important to have that sort of strategy for many situations. So I guess this is pretty clear now, right?
Yeah, yeah, and where I live in Scotland, and so we sometimes have snow days where children who travel and can't get to school. Now, it used to be that people would think, "Oh, that's great, that's a day off." Well, now it's not, is it? Because
Yeah,
we've
exactly,
proven we can do it. So now snow days are online learning.
exactly. And it's nice that I think the shift is going to be much smoother.
Mhm.
So when teaching online, how to identify student needs, and how to make resources appropriate for them? What tips would you give to, you know, not only the teachers but schools in general, like more on a strategic level?
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, if children have an individual support plan based on their individual assessment arrangements, then it's important that teachers, as they would do, normally, to liaise with their, learning support department. But I think when we're looking at education now, I think we're moving towards a more personalized manifestation of what education actually looks like. So instead of teaching to a homogenous group, based on age, perceived ability, gender, for example, instead of doing that, we need to be looking at the individual and their needs. So research has shown that there are really clear ways to do that. One of them is the Universal Design for Learning framework, where you can vary the way in which you approach your teaching based on things like pace, content, and the method of delivery. And even sharing your digital resources with your students ahead of time. They can adapt them should they wish with a color filter. They can change the font. They can take the text and make it into a presentation that they would like to access. And that goes for anyone, regardless of whether they have a specific learning need. It's their preference. And we always operate, to a higher level of efficiency and effectiveness if we actually feel comfortable. And that doesn't mean that we need to have dyslexia, dyspraxia, any kind of barrier to learning. It's just our preference. And when we feel like we're being listened to, and when we feel like there are ways that we can change the content to suit us, then we're going to thrive, I think. But there's one researcher that I use a lot in my work, and that's Mayer. And he has 15 principles of multimedia design. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about online learning. Is to look at the way in which we're actually constructing our learning and teaching materials. And it's based on the science of how human beings learn. So there's no point having a PowerPoint that's all whizzing and fancy, or a really busy worksheet that's black and white, for example. That's not going to meet the needs of every learner. And so Mayer's work really is about reducing cognitive overload for students, because as human beings, when we feel overwhelmed, we can shut down, and that can happen to students when they feel overwhelmed. So he talks about doing things like pre-teaching core concepts. So if you're about to introduce a topic that has some really big ideas, like, say, for example, I teach politics, so I would be teaching about democracy. So instead of just starting the lesson cold and say, right, everyone, today we're going to learn about democracy, I would pre-teach the core concepts in a little video. So I might say, well, this is what democracy looked like in ancient Greece. This is what it looks like in Great Britain. This is what it looks like in Brazil. And it's based on fairness. And so go through the principles before I even started teaching any content. And then I would also maybe limit that, as Mayer says, to 5 to 7 chunks, no more, because you know what it's like. If you're teaching, you're trying to cover too much, you might as well have covered nothing. And so when Mayer writes, he talks about how, PowerPoints, audio, video, PDFs, they're not delivery systems, they're cognitive aids. And from that, students then construct their knowledge and understanding. So we as teachers, when we're creating our resources, whatever format they're in, they need to be constructed with the learner in mind and not the teacher. Now, so many, I think when PowerPoints are created, sometimes teachers use them as a crutch to talk from, and sometimes narrate from. Now that's not very helpful to a learner. Maybe if they share that PowerPoint, it'd be more helpful. But instead of creating something that's going to prop up the teacher, we need to do things that prop up the learner.
No, definitely. And technology is, I think it's, I mean, from all the teaching I've done until today, technology is always so helpful in adapting the resources, because it's so much more, it's so much quicker and so many options that you have to make sure, that everyone have the provisions that they need, just to clear out everything that is not what they should be learning, right? As you said, like the cognitive workload. So definitely.
And may cause that extraneous processing. So don't add in additional steps that the student needs to do to access the information on, the foundation of the information. It's different when you're getting further up and a bit more advanced, but on a basic level, when you're introducing something, don't make them jump through more hoops than is necessary, because you're then ended up creating a barrier yourself to learning, which is exactly the opposite of what you want to do as a teacher.
Definitely. And my next question is actually, it's not exactly that, but it relates to that. It's about like this cognitive overload. So from our research at the EduTech Alliance, we see that schools that they don't have like an education technology shared vision and a structure, like a strategy in place. The use of technology is unorchestrated, and so it's not used in a coherent way across all levels or all teachers, all students, and so on. So in this situation, the schools end up with many different tech tools that were brought in by different teachers that just start, I like this and I like that. And when the student goes into a lesson, they have different tools, and then they go to another lesson, they have different other like 10 tools. So the learning curve that they have, all this path, they're wasting time. And there's also this cognitive overload. I mean, are they not focusing on the right thing that they should be focusing on? So the question is, from a teacher's perspective, what do you think is the impact of having this myriad of tools that the school offers or allows teachers to use? What's the impact on student learning?
Well, I think, first of all, as I said before, it's well intentioned to go and seek out ed tech tools, absolutely. And it's really empowering for teachers to be given autonomy to go and seek those things out. So I'll say that, first of all, to couch what I'm going to say next. But I think that now we know more and we have more data, we have a better understanding about what's effective. And for me, this is less is more, okay, for the teacher and for the student. Now, we don't need hundreds of ed tech tools. We need ed tech tools that integrate with each other. And I think for me, the ed tech tools that will survive this will be the ones that offer API integration. So they talk to each other. Yeah. So when students have to remember multiple passwords, and teachers, I mean, I've been in a situation where I thought, what's my Kahoot password? Is it different from my Canva? And it's an absolute mess. It's onerous and it's chaotic. And then you've got to also think about data privacy. So who owns all that data? Who can access that data on your students? Do you know this? And schools need to know this, and they need to find a way to track it. And it can be really tricky to track this when individual teachers have individual accounts and they're using different platforms and different classes. Now, I know for me, at one point, I might have had about 15 different accounts for different ed tech tools that I was using on my own. And it's great when teachers share what works, but really schools need a strategy. They need to streamline what they're offering, and they need to look at the tools that are working. So they need to think, does this tool actually improve learning? How does this tool support teaching? Does this serve us any longer? Or should we remove it? And sometimes removing things is actually where we need to start. If we keep adding, we're going to end up with thousands of tools. So for me, I mean, design thinking is something at the heart of a lot of the work I do. And I think when schools approach this in a design thinking way, so if they think, firstly, they need to ask questions, get a deep understanding of the issues that teachers and learners are facing. And then they need to define the problem that needs to be solved, rather than say, that looks nice, let's get all of these things and then figure it out later. because then they need to ideate, they need to look at what could work and what needs to be removed, then trial it and then test it. It's an iterative process. This is an ever-changing dynamic landscape that schools are facing right now, and they need to be agile. But first and foremost, before they buy any new shiny ed tech product or solution, they need to focus on what effective learning looks like and what effective teaching looks like, and then use the ed tech to support that.
Exactly. Very fabulous. And that's very aligned with what we say at the EduTech Alliance, and that when we try to help schools, that's what we're trying to do, like shine lights on everything that is actually useful, how much of what they have they're actually using. Sometimes they have too many tools doing the same thing, so why not choose one and use it well instead of have too many tools.
Yes.
And it's all part of as you mentioned, like a strategy and thinking carefully about it and really focusing on solving these issues, thinking about learning and obviously operation efficiency, because as you mentioned, as a teacher, having all these passwords and all these tools, this will make your life a mess, right?
Yeah. And have you ever tried to keep track of all the subscriptions you've got? If you think about just your own life and the subscriptions you might have to all these different streaming services, I mean, I couldn't tell you, for sure how many subscriptions I have. Imagine a school with, 200 teachers and all the subscriptions that may be paid for, maybe free, that are running, and you can't keep track of them.
No, definitely. But I think this is a great time for schools to do exactly as you said, like now, share what was useful, what was not, what they can remove or can they focus on. So I think this is a great time to do that. And to end this interview, can you tell us more about Hexis 20? Do we say Hexis 21 or 21st?
Oh, 21. So Hexis really is it's a state of being. And so the idea behind it is, we need to be in the 21st century. I know we are, but we need to be acting and teaching children, young people and professionals, the thinking skills that are necessary now and in the future. So many jobs are going to become obsolete. So if we don't become future proof and gain that human edge, as artificial intelligence is, like a juggernaut, it's unstoppable. We need to develop these human characteristics and develop these 21st century skills. And one of those, for me, one of the most important ones is creative problem solving. So I set up this website. I built this website myself to show schools and teachers how they can integrate the 4 C's design thinking processes into their everyday thinking and teaching. So I created a comprehensive PBL design thinking course that's free to all schools to access. They can access that on my website. And then I also write about these issues and build models for teachers and schools to shift their focus to be able to, enable deeper, purposeful and future-led learning. And so that's what the platform's about. It's a community-based platform where I want to share, because, when we share ideas, we're all going to get better. And at the moment, I'm writing a book called The Red Thread, and it's about core ideas that connect effective teaching and learning mastery. So not seeing those things as separate things, but actually seeing them as part of the same whole. There are about 50 different practical strategies, research-informed strategies and case studies that any high school teacher could incorporate into their lessons. And until that time, I've got a bi-monthly free teaching and learning e-newsletter available with research-informed tips, videos that any teacher can access. And they just need to sign up on the website. It's hexis21.com.
Very good. We're gonna add this the site to the video, and also if you look at the description, you can also access those links. Oh. Hannah, it was such a pleasure to hear, to have you here, to hear all your amazing ideas and everything that you're putting forth with, your work, your website, your book. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.